fire did not care who was innocent. It did not read indictments, listen to explanations, or pause to decide whether a bottle held medicine or poison. It consumed whatever stood in its path and left the survivors to decide what the ashes meant. When Adrian Vale saw a woman climbing through a second-floor window of Bell and Reed Pharmacy in Lower Manhattan, he assumed he was watching an arsonist escape the scene of her own crime. Then the woman turned around, disappeared into the smoke, and emerged moments later carrying an unconscious boy. Adrian should have remained where he was. Every newspaper in New York knew the woman's name. Eleanor Reed was the pharmacist accused of preparing the medicine connected to the death of Senator Charles Pembroke. Adrian's younger sister, Beatrice, had also taken medicine bearing the Bell and Reed label shortly before her own unexplained death. For 18 months, Adrian had believed Eleanor was part of a company that had traded patient safety for profit. Yet as glass cracked above the street and fire bells echoed between the brick buildings, he ran toward the woman he had taught himself to despise. Eleanor lowered the boy onto the wet pavement just as a burning support beam broke loose above the entrance. Adrian pulled her back before it fell, and the force of their movement sent them both into a shallow stream of water running along the curb. Eleanor coughed, her hands red from heat and smoke, but she still held a leather-bound ledger against her chest. "The boy," she whispered. "Help him first." Adrian looked toward his driver, who had already lifted the child and was checking his breathing. "He's alive." Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, as though those words gave her permission to feel the exhaustion she had been holding back. When Adrian tried to guide her farther from the building, she resisted. "There are more records in the back room. The building is coming down. Those records prove I did not cause those deaths. You will not prove anything if you stay inside. Then let me go." Adrian studied her smoke-streaked face. There was no panic in her amber eyes, only a desperate focus that had become almost calm. He knew that expression. He had seen it in his own mirror during the months after Beatrice's funeral. Eleanor tried to take another step toward the entrance, but her knees gave way. Adrian caught her before she reached the pavement. The ledger slipped from her hands, and a loose page opened across the stones. It contained patient names, production numbers, and the seal of Harrow Pharmaceutical Company. Adrian saw the company name just before the upper floor of the pharmacy collapsed inward and flames rose above the rooftops. He picked up the ledger, carried Eleanor to his carriage, and told the driver to take them to the Vale residence. The driver stared at him. "Mr. Vale, the police are on their way. That woman is wanted for questioning. Then they may speak to me at my front door." Adrian covered Eleanor with his coat. "But tonight she will not be handed to a crowd that decided the verdict before examining the evidence." Eleanor woke 2 days later in a high-ceilinged room overlooking Madison Avenue. Her throat felt raw, and both hands were wrapped in clean bandages. When she tried to sit up, a man's voice came from the chair near the window. "If you damage the new skin, the doctor will charge me for another visit." Adrian Vale sat with the leather ledger open across his knees. Morning light sharpened the controlled lines of his face. Eleanor looked at the book and then at him. "Give it back. You inhaled enough smoke to keep most people in bed for a week. You are not in a strong position to issue orders. You are not in a position to read confidential patient records. I am in my own house, holding the book you nearly lost your life to protect. That gives me the right to ask why." Eleanor pushed aside the blanket and tried to stand. The room tilted. Adrian placed the ledger on the table and steadied her shoulder. "Sit down. Have you turned me over to the police?" "No, then what do you want?" "The truth." She gave a dry, humorless laugh. "Truth is not a popular product in New York right now. Try selling it to me." Eleanor studied him. She knew who he was. Adrian Vale owned coal operations in Pennsylvania, freight lines across 3 states, and enough railroad stock to make bankers reconsider their tone when he entered a room. Beatrice Vale had died after a sudden medical crisis the previous spring. Eleanor's name had appeared on the bottle beside her bed. The newspapers called Eleanor a reckless woman who had reached beyond her training. The police called it professional negligence. Felix Harrow, the wealthy manufacturer who had financed Bell and Reed, called her an ambitious employee who had betrayed the public's trust. No one called her innocent. "You believe I caused your sister's death," Eleanor said. "I did." "What changed?" Adrian tapped the ledger. "You went back into a burning building for records. Guilty people usually save themselves first. Perhaps I was afraid of prison. You saved a child before you saved the records." Eleanor turned toward the window. The boy was Thomas, the son of a laundress who rented the rooms above the pharmacy. He often sat near the counter drawing ships on wrapping paper while his mother worked. "How is he?" "His lungs were irritated by the smoke, but the doctor expects a full recovery." Some of the tension left Eleanor's shoulders. Adrian noticed, then slid the ledger toward her. "Harrow Pharmaceutical supplies almost half the pain medicine used in New York hospitals. These figures suggest that several shipments contain 3 times the amount of opiate listed on the label. Your notes include a production number beside my sister's name. That number identifies the batch. And every patient who died had received medicine from one of the same 3 batches. There were more patients than the newspapers reported." Eleanor opened the ledger carefully with her bandaged hands. "I found 17 cases in New York, 8 in Cleveland, and 12 in coal towns across Pennsylvania. Poor patients rarely have private doctors or families with influence. Their deaths were recorded as fever, heart failure, exhaustion, or natural causes." "Why did your name appear on those bottles?" "Harrow purchased the right to manufacture my formula. He promised to produce it at a lower cost for public hospitals and working families. After the agreement was signed, his company changed the ingredients, increased the strength, and continued using my seal because doctors trusted it." "When did you discover that?" 3 weeks before Senator Pembroke died. I began collecting samples and comparing production records. Harrow learned what I was doing. Someone replaced my original formulas in the pharmacy files, and a bottle bearing my signature was sent directly to Pembroke's home. When he died, Harrow presented himself as the generous investor deceived by an irresponsible pharmacist. I became the perfect newspaper story, a woman who believed she knew more than established physicians and finally harmed a powerful man. "Why did you not take the ledger to the police?" Eleanor looked down at her bandaged hands. "I gave a copy to the detective assigned to the case. The next morning he disappeared from duty. 2 days later, a warrant was issued for me." Adrian remained silent. Outside, carriage wheels and streetcars continued moving through the city as if no one had ever been buried beneath a convenient lie. "The pharmacy fire was not an accident," he said. "No, Harrow wanted the evidence gone. And he did not care whether I disappeared with it." Adrian rose and stood near the fireplace. "Beatrice may not have been the only person connected to my company who suffered because of Harrow's medicine. 36 workers at my northern mine died during the past 2 years. I believed lung disease was responsible for all of them. Now I know many were given the same pain medicine so they could continue working through injuries and illness." Eleanor watched him carefully. "You want to sue Harrow?" "I want to expose what he did." "Those are not always the same thing." Adrian turned back to her. "I hired investigators, purchased stock in his company, and followed his shipping contracts. I have financial records but no medical training. You have the science and the patient histories, but you have no public credibility, money, or protection. You are proposing a partnership. I am proposing a way for both of us to reach the truth." Eleanor leaned against the pillows. "I will not become a tool for a wealthy man's personal revenge. What about the families who lost someone? They are the reason I kept the ledger. Then help me prove that Harrow's company knew its medicine was unsafe. And what happens when we have proof? You hand it to judges who attend the same dinners as his board members? No. We make the evidence so complete and so public that no court, newspaper, or investor can quietly bury it. Adrian returned to the chair. I own property in Black Ridge, Pennsylvania, about 120 miles from New York. I will open a community clinic there under your direction. You will examine the medicine supplied to workers, continue testing Harrow products, and document every case. I will fund the laboratory, pay the staff, and publicly support the work. Eleanor stared at him as if he had suggested opening a school in the middle of a storm. You intend to hire a woman wanted by the New York police? Yes. Your reputation will suffer. My reputation has survived worse things than newspaper gossip. People will say I am receiving special treatment because of a personal relationship. People say whatever makes their own lives appear more interesting. Harrow will interfere with the clinic. He may try. Eleanor remained silent. The offer was not charity. Adrian did not look at her as someone helpless. He looked at her as a professional whose knowledge mattered. That should have offended her after everything she had endured, yet being treated as capable again felt almost painful. I have conditions, she said. One of Adrian's eyebrows lifted. I expected that. The clinic must treat workers' families, not only employees healthy enough to return to the mines. Medicine will be provided according to need and will not be deducted from wages. I choose the medical staff. Company supervisors will have no authority over treatment decisions. Agreed. Families who lost someone because of Harrow's products will receive compensation from company assets if we succeed. Agreed. And if you discover that I knowingly helped alter the medicine, you will personally deliver the evidence to the authorities. Adrian met her eyes. If I discover that, the authorities may be the safest people for you to face. Eleanor almost smiled. Good. At least we understand each other. Adrian removed a folded agreement from his coat. The contract was prepared this morning. You prepared it before knowing whether I would wake up. I prefer problems that can be addressed on paper. People are rarely that kind of problem. I am beginning to notice. Eleanor read every line, revised 3 sections, added financial independence for the clinic, and signed her name. When she put down the pen, she understood that she had entered a different kind of danger, but for the first time since the accusations began, it was a danger she had chosen. 3 weeks later, a brass sign reading Black Ridge Community Clinic was mounted above the entrance of a 2-story brick building near the coal yards. Residents watched Eleanor step from the carriage as though scandal itself had arrived in a dark traveling coat. The New York newspapers had reached town before she did. Some called her the poison pharmacist protected by a railroad millionaire. Others described Adrian as a powerful man manipulated by an attractive fugitive. Felix Harrow released a statement claiming he was deeply saddened to see a respected businessman misled by a desperate woman running from justice. Eleanor read the article in the empty examination room, folded it into a small square, and placed it beneath the short leg of an uneven table. Adrian watched her. You are not keeping it. I found a better use for it. Only one patient came on the first day, a girl with a severe cough whose mother brought her through the back entrance to avoid being seen. 4 patients came the next day. By the end of the week, the waiting room was filled with minors, children, and women whose hands were cracked from washing clothes in cold water. Eleanor worked from sunrise until the oil lamps began to fade. She discovered that many workers were using an amber-colored pain medicine supplied by Harrow Pharmaceutical. Long-term users showed slowed breathing, confusion, and periods of unusual exhaustion that supervisors had dismissed as laziness. Eleanor collected samples, sealed them, and recorded the results. Adrian arrived each evening with warehouse reports, railroad schedules, and invoices signed by subsidiary companies that did not appear on any public business registration. They worked at opposite ends of a long laboratory table. At first, every conversation involved numbers. Gradually, Eleanor learned that Adrian drank coffee without sugar but always forgot it until it was cold. Adrian learned that she tapped her pencil 3 times whenever she found an inconsistency. She learned that he personally inspected mine cables and ventilation equipment after every serious incident, even though other owners considered such work beneath them. He learned that she carried a handwritten list of every deceased patient inside her coat, not because she needed it as evidence, but because she refused to let anyone become only a number. 1 month later, Adrian received an invitation to the annual presentation at the New York Academy of Medicine, where Felix Harrow planned to introduce a new pain treatment. "We are going," Adrian said. Eleanor did not look up from her microscope. "You are going. I am continuing my work. You are the only person who can ask the questions Harrow cannot answer. I am also the only person in that room who might be detained before finishing the first question. The warrant has been suspended pending review." Eleanor looked at him. "How?" "I persuaded the district attorney to examine the financial connections between the original detective and Harrow's legal department." "Is that how you solve every problem?" "Only the ones built on money." Adrian placed a small wooden box beside her. Inside was a silver pin shaped like a mountain laurel branch, the emblem used by the Vale Coal and Rail Company. "I do not need jewelry," Eleanor said. "No. You need something the people in that room understand. Borrowed influence. Public backing." Adrian lifted the pin. "When you wear this, everyone will know that any attempt to silence you will be challenged by my company, my attorneys, and every newspaper willing to print the dispute." Eleanor turned so he could attach the pin to her collar. His fingers brushed the back of her neck, and she became suddenly aware of how close he stood. "I do not want you acting as my shield forever," she said. "I do not intend to." "Then what is this?" "A bridge. You use it until they have no choice but to respect your own name." That evening, the New York Academy of Medicine glowed beneath electric lights and polished brass fixtures. Physicians, hospital trustees, investors, journalists, and prominent families gathered under the glass ceiling. When Adrian entered beside Eleanor, conversation softened into whispers. Eleanor held her head high. The silver pin at her collar felt heavier than its size. Felix Harrow stood at the front of the hall, his gray hair perfectly arranged and his pleasant expression carefully practiced. He looked more like a generous public benefactor than the man who had ordered records removed and accusations manufactured. When he saw Eleanor, he paused for one brief moment before his smile widened. "Miss Reed," he said loudly enough for the room to hear. "What an unexpected pleasure to see you at an institution devoted to science rather than scandal." Several guests laughed. Eleanor felt the memory of smoke tighten in her chest, but Adrian spoke quietly beside her. "Do not look at the crowd. Look at the man who is afraid of you." Eleanor looked at Harrow. He was smiling, but his hand held the edge of the podium too tightly. She walked toward the front. "I came to hear about your new medicine. I am honored. You claim it is safe at a dose of 40 drops. Completely safe. Then why did 3 test shipments delivered to Black Ridge contain different concentrations of the active ingredient?" The room became silent. Harrow tilted his head. "I have no idea what you are suggesting." Eleanor removed 3 sealed bottles from her case. The labels list the same production number and manufacturing date. One bottle contains a 2% concentration. The second contains 6%. The third contains almost 9%. Those samples may have been altered after shipment. That is possible, which is why Professor Whitcomb of Johns Hopkins University tested unopened bottles taken directly from one of your contracted warehouses. An older physician rose from the first row. "Miss Reed's figures are accurate. The variation is substantial and medically unacceptable." Whispers traveled across the hall. Harrow looked toward Adrian. "This is a performance arranged by a man with a personal grudge against me." Adrian did not answer. Eleanor stepped closer to the podium. "You are correct about one fact. Adrian Vale has personal reasons to distrust your company. But chemical compounds do not hold grudges. Laboratory measurements do not seek revenge. They show that one bottle bearing your label may reduce pain while the next places a patient at serious risk." Harrow attempted to recover his smile. A dramatic statement from the woman connected to Senator Pembroke's death. If you truly believe I prepared the medicine that reached his home, release the factory production ledger from the week his bottle was packaged. Harrow's smile disappeared. Internal company records are not your concern. Then you have nothing to fear from an independent review. A well-known socialite named Margaret Wexley spoke from the front of the room. She had built a reputation for ending careers with a carefully placed rumor. Miss Reed, some might question whether it is proper for a young woman to lecture a room filled with experienced physicians and businessmen. Eleanor glanced at the elaborate feathers on Mrs. Wexley's hat. I agree that the situation is unfortunate. It would be far more convenient if the experienced men already understood the evidence. A few people failed to hide their laughter. Mrs. Wexley's expression tightened. Eleanor turned back to Harrow. Tomorrow morning, I will send the laboratory results to every hospital using your products. You may release the production records voluntarily, or you may allow every doctor in the country to wonder what you are hiding. She stepped away from the podium. Adrian offered his arm. Eleanor did not accept it because she needed support. She placed her hand there as a professional leaving a room she had just forced to listen. In the hallway, Adrian looked at her with restrained admiration. You left one of the most powerful men in American medicine without a response. He will find one. I know. And when he does, he will use it against both of us. The corner of Adrian's mouth lifted. Then I hope you slept well last night. The following weeks became an undeclared contest of influence and evidence. Harrow paid suppliers to delay medicine deliveries to Black Ridge. Adrian purchased controlling interests in the suppliers and restored the contracts. Harrow funded newspaper stories based on anonymous accusations. Eleanor responded with laboratory reports signed by 3 universities. Harrow pressured hospitals to dismiss doctors who cooperated with her investigation. Adrian established a private fund to support them while their cases were reviewed. Every attack strengthened their professional alliance, but it also made the private distance between them harder to maintain. Their hands sometimes remained together a moment too long when exchanging documents. Dinners that began with business ended with stories neither had intended to share. Eleanor told Adrian that her father had practiced medicine in a small Maine fishing town and taught her to identify useful plants before she could read. Adrian told her that Beatrice used to replace the financial reports in his library with adventure novels so he would be forced to take a break. One night, Eleanor fell asleep over a set of test results. When she woke, Adrian's coat covered her shoulders, and he sat across from her pretending to read a report he was holding upside down. Neither of them spoke about the feeling growing between them. Naming it would make it real, and people who survived by controlling every detail often feared real emotions more than public threats. The balance shifted during a horticultural exhibition at the New York Botanical Garden. Eleanor was examining a plant advertised as a new sleep remedy when Felix Harrow's voice came from behind her. You always had a talent for turning trouble into opportunity. He stood beneath the glass roof with a silver-handled cane and the same reassuring smile he used in newspaper photographs. You should not be speaking to me, Eleanor said. Do you believe Vale's company pin makes you untouchable? No. Knowledge makes me difficult to silence. Harrow moved closer but remained several feet away. You are confusing a wealthy man's obsession with loyalty. Vale does not care about you. He wants revenge for his sister. Once I am removed from his way, you will no longer be useful. The words found the exact doubt Eleanor had tried not to examine. At least I was useful once. Your value depends entirely on people never learning what is inside your bottles. Harrow lowered his voice. I convinced New York that you were responsible for Pembroke's death with a signature and a few witnesses. I can do worse. Then why have you not done it? His smile became rigid. Because I am offering one final opportunity. Give me the ledger and the medicine samples. I will withdraw my statement and explain that a factory supervisor changed the formula without authorization. Your reputation will be restored. And the families who lost someone. The dead do not need reputations. The living do. Eleanor looked at him and realized that she no longer saw the man who had controlled her future. She saw a frightened executive whose influence depended on the truth remaining hidden. "You misunderstood me from the beginning," she said. "I do not want forgiveness for something I did not do." Harrow stepped into her path. "Think carefully." Before he could continue, Adrian approached from the main walkway. His expression was calm, but his voice carried enough authority to stop the conversation around them. "Mr. Harrow, Miss Reed has made her position clear. We were having a private discussion. It has ended." Adrian stood beside Eleanor rather than in front of her. "If you contact her again outside the presence of attorneys, I will review every debt, lease, shipping contract, and insurance policy connected to your company. By the end of the month, your board may discover that your empire depends on agreements it no longer controls." Harrow looked at Eleanor. "You see. You are only an excuse for him to continue a personal campaign." "Leave," Adrian said. Harrow walked away, but his final words remained behind. "Eventually, you will learn I am right." When he disappeared beyond the palms, Eleanor noticed that her hands were trembling. Adrian's controlled expression gave way to concern. "Did he threaten you?" "Only with words. That is enough for me to involve our attorneys immediately. We still need evidence that connects him directly to the production decisions. At this moment, I care more about your safety than the case. I care about both." Adrian looked at her as though that answer caused him pain. "I cannot stand near you and pretend it means nothing when he tries to frighten you." "Why?" The question escaped before Eleanor could stop it. The crowd had moved toward another exhibit. There were no numbers, contracts, or reports available for either of them to hide behind. There was only the warmth of the greenhouse, the scent of damp earth, and the small distance between them. "Because I have already lost too much to his greed," Adrian said. "That is not the whole answer. Eleanor. You told me to look directly at the person who feared me. Now look at me and tell the truth." Adrian closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, his familiar restraint was gone. "Because whenever you enter a room, I notice every exit. Because when you work past midnight, I remain awake until I see the lamp in your room go dark. Because the idea of losing you makes every plan, investment, and argument feel meaningless." Neither of them could later say who moved first. Their kiss was brief and careful, filled more with relief than passion, and it ended before either forgot where they were. Adrian rested his forehead lightly against hers. "I am sorry," he said. "For kissing me. For allowing our partnership to begin as part of my anger toward Harrow." Eleanor stepped back enough to see his face. "What are you doing?" "I crossed the boundary we established. And now you intend to hide behind the contract. I promised you the right to choose. Then allow me to choose." She removed the veil pin from her collar and placed it in his hand. Adrian looked at it as though she had returned something far more important than silver. "I no longer need this as protection," Eleanor said. "Not because I plan to leave. I do not want to stand beside you as someone under your care. If we continue, I want to stand beside you as an equal. You have always been my equal." "No. At first, I was evidence you needed. Then I became your professional partner. I need to know what I am now." Adrian closed his hand around the pin. "You are the first person who made me imagine a future that was not organized around Beatrice's death. That still is not a complete answer. You are the woman I love." The statement was so direct that Eleanor forgot to breathe. Adrian continued before doubt could stop him. "I do not know how to care for someone without turning it into a responsibility I must manage. I do not know how to trust another person with the power to disappoint or hurt me." Eleanor placed her hand over his heart. "I do not need you to become weaker. I need you to trust that I am strong enough to stand with you." Adrian opened his hand and returned the pin to her palm instead of attaching it to her collar. "Then keep it, not as my protection, but as a promise that every resource carrying the Vale name belongs to our shared work, not to my private campaign. Eleanor closed her fingers around the pin. I accept that term. They returned to Black Ridge with a new understanding that required no written contract, but Felix Harrow did not give them time to enjoy it. 3 days later, a package arrived at the clinic. Inside were letters written in a nearly perfect imitation of Eleanor's handwriting. They described an invented plan in which she and Adrian had arranged Senator Pembroke's fatal medicine, set the pharmacy fire to remove evidence, and manipulated Harrow pharmaceutical stock for financial gain. A typed note demanded that they bring the patient ledger, laboratory samples, and all supporting records to Warehouse 12 at a Hudson River pier before midnight on Friday. If they refused, copies of the letters would reach every major newspaper by Saturday morning. Adrian read the note and moved toward the fireplace. Eleanor stopped him before the first page reached the flame. Do not destroy them. They are false. They are also proof that Harrow is becoming desperate. I am sending you out of New York until this is resolved. No, he arranged the destruction of your pharmacy while you were inside. I will not wait to discover his next decision. You just told me I was your equal. That does not require me to ignore a threat. And loving me does not give you authority to make my choices. Adrian turned toward the window, his jaw tense. Eleanor placed the letters on the table. Harrow expects fear. If we leave, he will present our absence as evidence of guilt. If we surrender the records, the families will lose their only chance for accountability. Then what do you propose? We go to the warehouse. No, not to surrender the evidence. We go to let him believe we are considering it long enough for him to explain what he did. Eleanor pointed to a faint yellow residue along the edge of the paper. These letters came from the factory office. This powder is used to stabilize one of Harrow's compounds. The warehouse may contain the original shipping ledger. If we obtain it legally, we can connect every unsafe batch to his authorization. The meeting is clearly a trap. Yes. You say that as if it should reassure me. You will not allow me to enter without a plan. Adrian studied her. The anger in his eyes gradually shifted into calculation. I will place investigators at every exit. Not the local police. We do not know which officers have accepted Harrow's money. I will contact a federal marshal, 2 independent witnesses, and a reporter. A reporter? If Harrow intends to use public opinion, we will ensure that the truth reaches the front page before his forged letters. On Friday night, fog covered the Hudson River piers. Cargo cranes rose above the water, and warehouse lights appeared as dull yellow squares in the distance. Eleanor entered Warehouse 12 carrying a leather case. Adrian waited nearby with investigators and witnesses, but she could not see him. That was part of the plan. Harrow needed to believe she had come alone. A lamp glowed at the far end of the building. Felix Harrow stood between wooden shipping crates bearing his company seal. 2 members of his legal staff waited near a desk. You are more practical than I expected, he said. I often hear that from men who underestimated me. Where are the records? Eleanor raised the case. First, I want the forged letters and every copy. After I examine what you brought. No. You arranged the destruction of my pharmacy. Your promises have no value. Harrow stepped closer to the desk. You still do not understand your position. I created your reputation. I financed your business, placed your formula in hospitals, and made your name known across the country. You used my name to sell medicine your company had altered. I turned a neighborhood pharmacy into a national enterprise. You built that enterprise on patients who trusted the label. Those people were already sick or injured. My medicine allowed them to remain productive. Your medicine concealed warning signs until families had no time to seek proper treatment. Harrow's friendly expression disappeared. Give me the case. Who authorized the formula changes? I did. Eleanor kept her expression still. You signed the manufacturing instructions. I approved every production order. No bottle left the factory without authorization from my office. Including the batch delivered to Senator Pembroke? Harrow smiled with quiet satisfaction. Especially that batch. Pembroke planned to withdraw his investment and reveal inconsistencies in our accounts. His death removed a business problem and gave the public someone else to blame. A floorboard shifted above the warehouse office. Harrow looked toward the sound. Eleanor knew the reporter had heard enough. She stepped away from the desk. Thank you. For what? For confirming the entire case in front of witnesses. Harrow's expression changed as the main doors opened. Adrian entered with a federal marshal, Professor Whitcomb, 2 attorneys, and a reporter from the New York Chronicle. Harrow looked from one face to another. This is private property. The company leasing this warehouse defaulted on its federal freight bonds this morning, Adrian said. A court order granted investigators access to inventory and records. The marshal has the authorization. Harrow turned toward his legal staff, but neither man spoke. The marshal presented the order and asked Harrow to remain while the shipping ledgers were secured. No one raised a hand or made a threat. Harrow's authority simply disappeared as each sealed book was carried to the evidence table. One ledger contained the same production numbers Eleanor had recorded. Another included Harrow's initials beside every formula change. A final file connected payments from Harrow's company to the detective who had received Eleanor's original evidence. Adrian stood in silence while the truth about Beatrice's medicine appeared line by line. My sister trusted the label on that bottle, he said. She believed the people who made it had followed the formula. Harrow looked toward the floor. The company made difficult decisions to remain competitive. Adrian's hands tightened at his sides, but Eleanor stepped beside him. Do not let his choices define what happens next. Adrian looked at Harrow, then at the ledgers, and finally at Eleanor. He understood that she was not asking him to protect Harrow. She was protecting the future they had begun to build together. He is not worth carrying into the rest of your life, she said quietly. Let the evidence finish this. Adrian released a slow breath and turned to the marshal. Take every record the order allows. Make certified copies before sunrise. By the following morning, Harrow's recorded statement and the warehouse evidence appeared on the front page of the Chronicle. By noon, federal officials had secured the factory records. Before the end of the week, hospitals across the United States suspended purchases of Harrow products pending independent review. The shipping ledgers revealed false reports, secret payments, altered formulas, and dozens of concealed patient complaints. The warrant against Eleanor was cancelled. A New York court publicly acknowledged that the original evidence against her had been fabricated. Yet the most important moment did not occur in a courtroom. It happened 3 months later in Black Ridge when a woman brought her son into the clinic. Thomas still carried a small mark near his temple from the pharmacy fire. He placed a drawing on Eleanor's desk. It showed the red brick clinic beneath uneven blue letters that read, "The place where people get better." Eleanor hung the picture beside the list of patients whose cases had led to the investigation. She did not remove their names after winning. Success could not return them to their families, but it could ensure that their stories protected the people who came after them. A compensation fund was created from the sale of Harrow pharmaceutical assets. Workers' families received payments without being forced to sign silence agreements. The Black Ridge Clinic opened 2 additional locations in Pennsylvania. Eleanor was invited to speak in the same New York hall where people had once laughed at her. This time, she did not wear the Vale Company emblem. She wore a small copper pin shaped like a flame, made for her by Thomas from a discarded piece of metal. Adrian sat in the front row. When her speech ended, the audience rose. Eleanor did not look at the people who had once turned away from her. She looked at the man who had offered her a bridge when the world had removed every road, and who had been wise enough to step back once she could stand on her own. They returned to Black Ridge at the beginning of spring. On the drive from the station, their carriage passed the lot where a new pharmacy and research laboratory were being built. Adrian studied the plans. The East Laboratory is still too small. It is twice the size of the current one. You will fill it within 6 months. 4. Then I will ask the architect to expand it now. Eleanor smiled. You are finally learning to listen to experts. I have always listened to experts. You argued with me for an hour about the placement of the sinks. That was a productive discussion. The carriage stopped in front of the Vale house. Adrian stepped down and offered his hand. Eleanor placed hers in it. There were no reporters, investors, or enemies to persuade, yet he still looked at her as though her decision to stand beside him was something remarkable. I have considered one additional term, Adrian said. Our original contract has been completed. This term has nothing to do with Harrow. Then what does it concern? He removed a simple ring set with an amber stone the color of her eyes. A permanent partnership. Eleanor looked at the ring and then at him. The clinic remains under my professional authority. Of course. You may not purchase a newspaper simply because it criticizes my research. That term requires discussion. Adrian. Agreed. And when we disagree, you may not use your position or money to end the conversation. I have never done that. You have tried. Once. 3 times. Twice. Eleanor allowed him to wait just long enough for uncertainty to appear in his expression. Then she extended her hand. I accept. Adrian placed the ring on her finger and held her close. Their kiss was gentle, brief, and peaceful, carrying none of the fear that had marked the beginning of their story. Later that evening, Eleanor entered the shared office Adrian had prepared for them. One desk near the window held plans for the expanding clinic. The other held reports from the mines and railroads. Between them stood a locked cabinet containing the leather ledger she had carried out of the fire. Eleanor opened it one final time. The pages still held the faint smell of smoke. The edges were darkened, but the names remained readable. She no longer saw the ledger as proof of humiliation or fear. It was proof that truth could be burned, hidden, renamed, and denied, yet survive if even one person continued carrying it. Eleanor closed the book and placed it inside the cabinet. Adrian entered with 2 cups of coffee and set one beside her. Are you ready to close that chapter? I am not closing it. Eleanor locked the cabinet and held the key in her palm. I am simply refusing to let it decide the rest of my life. Adrian extended his hand. She placed the key in it, not to surrender control, but to share the weight. Together they stood at the window and looked across the rooftops of Black Ridge. Smoke still rose from the mine buildings, but beside them the red roof of the new clinic was beginning to take shape. Eleanor had entered a fire to preserve evidence of who she was. Adrian had spent 18 months believing that anger was the only thing keeping him moving. In the end, they did not prevail by ruining another person. They prevailed by building a system where dangerous medicine could not hide behind wealth, where working families were not reduced to statistics, and where 2 people who had survived through suspicion could place their future in each other's hands without surrendering their independence. Outside, the clinic bell rang to announce the arrival of a new patient. Eleanor lifted her coffee, turned toward the door, and Adrian walked beside her. Neither led. Neither followed. They moved forward together.